She grew up on the same narrow streets everyone else used to pass through without looking twice. The kind of place people called local, with a tone that meant small, ordinary, forgettable. And to him that word summed her up perfectly. Too local. Too simple. Too close to home to ever be impressive. At least that's what he believed. Because when he first noticed her, she was just another familiar face in the background of his life, blending in with the shops, the streetlights, and the everyday noise he thought he was destined to leave behind. He was different. Or at least he thought he was. He dressed sharper, talked bigger, dreamed louder. He wanted more than this place, more than the people who had never left it. He believed success lived somewhere far away, and anyone who stayed behind simply didn't want enough. So when he looked at her, he didn't really see her. He saw a reminder of everything he wanted to escape. Someone who belonged here while he was meant for something bigger. She, on the other hand, noticed everything. She noticed the way he walked like he was already late for a better life. The way he spoke about the future as if it were a promise made only to him. She noticed how people laughed a little harder around him, how he soaked up attention without realizing how much space he took. And still, she never tried to compete for his notice. She stayed quiet, grounded, moving through life at her own pace, carrying stories no one bothered to ask about. People around them had opinions. They always did. They said she was nice but plain. Smart but unremarkable. Kind but in a way that didn't turn heads. And about him they said he had potential. That word followed him everywhere. Potential to leave. Potential to succeed. Potential to become someone important. And slowly, without ever saying it out loud, everyone accepted the idea that they existed in two different worlds, even though they stood on the same streets. He barely spoke to her unless he had to. When he did, it was polite, distant, like talking to someone you expect to forget. And she responded the same way, calm and respectful, never pushing for more. If it bothered her, she never showed it. She had learned early that being underestimated was a quiet kind of freedom. When people don't expect much from you, they rarely notice what you're becoming. Life went on like that for years. He chased opportunities, built his image, and told anyone who would listen that he was going places. She stayed rooted, helping her family, building something slowly, learning lessons that didn't come with applause. Their paths crossed often but never deeply. Two lives running parallel, close enough to touch but never really meeting. Until that night. It started like any other evening, nothing special on the surface. A gathering that pulled people together out of routine rather than excitement. Familiar faces, familiar conversations, familiar laughter echoing in a space that had seen it all before. He showed up confident, comfortable, already halfway through telling a story about himself. She arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, taking her place on the edge like she always did. At first, nothing changed. He spoke, people listened. She observed, people overlooked her. But then something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like the moment before a storm when the air feels heavier than usual. Someone asked a question. A simple one. And unexpectedly she answered. Her voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't hesitant. It was clear, steady, and confident in a way no one had heard from her before. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even he stopped mid-thought, surprised by the sound of authority coming from someone he had never taken seriously. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just telling the truth, sharing a perspective shaped by experience rather than ambition. As she spoke, the room changed. People leaned in. Someone nodded. Someone else asked her another question. And then another. The same people who once labeled her local suddenly realized how little they actually knew about her. She talked about things he had only read about. She spoke with insight that came from doing, not dreaming. And for the first time, she wasn't in the background anymore. He felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Confusion. Curiosity. Maybe even discomfort. The image he had built of her didn't fit the person standing there now. This version of her didn't match the quiet, ordinary role he had assigned her in his mind. And as the attention shifted away from him and toward her, he realized something else that unsettled him even more. Everyone was listening. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that she had been living a full, complex life right in front of them all along. She had faced challenges he had never considered. She had made choices that required courage, not applause. While he was busy chasing a future somewhere else, she had been building something real right here. And suddenly the word local didn't sound small anymore. It sounded powerful. He watched as people reacted to her with admiration instead of indifference. Questions turned into conversations. Conversations turned into respect. And with every passing minute, his certainty cracked. He wondered how many times he had walked past greatness simply because it didn't look like his idea of success. How many stories he had ignored because they didn't fit his narrative. She met his eyes briefly, just for a second. There was no anger there. No pride. Just calm awareness. As if she had always known this moment would come. That one day the truth would speak louder than assumptions. And in that look he felt exposed. Seen in a way he had never expected. The night wasn't over yet. And neither was the shift happening between them. Because as the room buzzed with a new energy, one thing became clear. That evening wasn't just changing how others saw her. It was changing how he saw himself. And what happened next would force him to confront a truth he had been avoiding for far too long. But the real shock, that was still coming. After that night, nothing went back to how it was before. The streets were the same, the shops opened and closed on schedule, and people still greeted each other with familiar smiles. But beneath all that routine, something had shifted. The way people looked at her changed first. It was subtle, almost unspoken, but real. Conversations paused when she walked by now. Not because she demanded attention, but because people suddenly wondered what else they had missed. He felt it too, even when he tried to ignore it. Every time he replayed that evening in his mind, he noticed new details. The calm in her voice. The way she didn't rush her words. How she spoke as if she had nothing to prove. That confidence bothered him more than if she had been loud or dramatic. Because it came from a place he didn't understand. He told himself it was nothing. A moment. A coincidence. People have good nights sometimes, he reasoned. But deep down, a quiet question kept circling his thoughts. How did someone he barely noticed know so much? And why did it feel like she had been quietly ahead of him all along? Their past started to come back to him in pieces. Memories he had dismissed before now felt heavier. He remembered how she always listened more than she spoke. How she showed up consistently even when no one praised her. How she never complained about staying behind while others chased bigger dreams. At the time, he had mistaken her stillness for a lack of ambition. Now he wasn't so sure. She, meanwhile, went back to her life without making any announcements. No sudden changes. No victory lap. She didn't act like anything special had happened. She still helped at home, still handled her responsibilities, still walked those same streets with the same steady pace. But inside something stirred. Not pride. Not revenge. Just a quiet awareness that the truth had finally surfaced. Even if only for a moment. People began asking questions. Not directly at first. Small comments slipped into casual conversations. Did you know she was involved in that? Or, I heard she's been doing this for years. The mystery around her grew, and with it, curiosity. She answered when asked but never overshared. Every response revealed just enough to make people want to know more. That balance intrigued him. He was used to explaining himself, selling his ideas, making sure people understood his value. She didn't do that. She let her work, her experiences, and her calm presence speak for her. And without trying, she drew attention in a way he never had. One afternoon, their paths crossed again, this time without a crowd around them. Just the two of them, standing in a place they had both passed through countless times. The air felt awkward, heavier than it should have been. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words didn't come easily. For the first time, he wasn't sure which version of her he was talking to. The quiet local girl he thought he knew, or the person who had surprised everyone that night. She broke the silence first, casually, as if nothing had changed. Her tone was the same as it had always been. Polite. Grounded. That almost made it harder for him. Because if she acted different, he could adjust. But she didn't. And that forced him to confront the fact that the change wasn't in her. It was in him. He asked a simple question, one that barely scratched the surface of what he really wanted to know. She answered simply too. No long explanation. No need to impress. But even that short exchange left him unsettled. It confirmed what he had been trying to deny. She had layers. And he had never bothered to look past the surface. As days passed, stories about her continued to surface. Pieces of her background that explained her depth but also raised new questions. She had taken risks quietly. Faced setbacks without an audience. Learned skills that didn't come from classrooms or big stages. While he was busy planning a future somewhere else, she had been shaping a present that mattered. The contrast between them grew sharper. He began to feel exposed by his own words, his own dreams. Dreams that suddenly felt fragile when compared to her lived reality. He had always believed leaving was the only way to win. She had stayed, and somehow she had grown stronger because of it. People started comparing them, though no one said it out loud. The successful dreamer versus the underestimated local. The one who talked about change versus the one who quietly created it. He noticed the shift in energy when they were both in the same space. Attention didn't automatically lean toward him anymore. Sometimes, It drifted toward her without effort. That unsettled him in ways he didn't expect. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he realized how much of his identity depended on being seen as different, as better. And now that image felt threatened. He wondered if he had built his confidence on shaky ground all along. She noticed the change in him too. The hesitation. The way he listened more now. The questions behind his eyes. But she didn't rush to fill the silence. She had learned patience the hard way. She knew that some realizations had to come on their own without being forced. Still there was tension. Unspoken but present. Between what he thought he knew and what he was slowly discovering. Between who she had always been and who others were just beginning to see. Every interaction felt like it carried weight, like something important was hovering just beneath the surface. And beneath all of it, a deeper mystery remained. Why had she stayed silent for so long? Why now? Was that night a turning point or just the beginning of something much bigger? People sensed there was more to her story, something not yet revealed. And she seemed to be choosing her moments carefully, as if waiting for the right time. He found himself thinking about her more than he wanted to admit. Not just about what she had done, but about what she might do next. About how many assumptions he had made without evidence. About how close he had been to missing the truth entirely. The streets felt smaller now, but also more alive. Like secrets were hidden in plain sight, waiting to be noticed. And as curiosity grew and tension thickened, one thing became clear. The night she shocked everyone was only the first crack in a story that was far from finished. Whatever came next would force both of them to face choices they had been avoiding. And when that moment arrived, there would be no going back. After that night, the quiet of the streets started to feel different. People whispered, glanced, and sometimes lingered longer than necessary when she walked by. It wasn't gossip exactly, it was curiosity. People were drawn to her in ways that didn't make sense at first. For him, that curiosity turned into a subtle tension he couldn't shake. Every time he saw her, every time she spoke or even laughed in the background, it felt like a reminder that he had been wrong. About her, about himself, about everything he thought he understood about success and being important. He tried to focus on his own path, the projects he was chasing, the dreams he had been building so carefully. But it was impossible. Even in moments when he should have been celebrating, he noticed her name cropping up again and again. Someone would mention her quietly in passing, or someone would reference something she had done with understated pride. And the more he heard, the more he realized that her impact on people was subtle but real, and it existed without her ever asking for acknowledgement. Meanwhile, she seemed almost untouched by all the attention. She moved through the days with a quiet rhythm, but there were hints beneath the surface that she was aware of the effect she had. At home, she spent long hours helping her family, juggling responsibilities that no one else wanted to handle. At work, she approached every task with focus, thinking several steps ahead. And yet, she never flaunted her achievements. People who underestimated her often didn't realize that what they saw as ordinary was actually discipline, resilience, and intelligence carefully honed over years. The tension between them grew in small, almost imperceptible ways. He noticed it when they shared the same space at gatherings. The unspoken challenge in her gaze. The quiet way she could hold a room's attention without needing to dominate it. The way people looked at her, not just with curiosity but with respect. And slowly he began to see that the word local no longer applied to her in the way he once thought. It had never been about smallness or insignificance. It had been a label for someone whose depth was invisible to the casual eye. Meanwhile, a subplot began to develop around those closest to them. Friends and neighbors had started noticing the subtle shift as well. Some quietly admired her, some envied her, and some openly doubted him, questioning how he had failed to see what everyone else now recognized. It became clear that the dynamic between them wasn't just personal. It rippled through the social fabric of the streets they shared. People started talking about possibilities, about potential collaborations, about alliances that no one had considered before. Every interaction carried weight, as if a hidden current ran beneath each smile and nod. From her perspective, there was a quiet calculation to everything. She knew the effect she had created, but she also knew the danger of revealing too much too soon. If people assumed they fully understood her, if they believed she had no hidden layers, they might underestimate her again, but not in a way she could control. And there was the man who had once dismissed her, whose perception she had changed with nothing more than words and presence. She wasn't trying to teach him a lesson, not exactly. But she also wasn't blind to the fact that he was being forced to confront his own assumptions, and that confrontation had a power all its own. The tension deepened when a new challenge appeared, an unexpected opportunity that involved both of them indirectly. A project was announced in the community, something big enough to attract attention from people outside their usual circles. The kind of project that required collaboration, creativity, and strategic thinking. And suddenly their paths were bound together whether they liked it or not. He knew he couldn't ignore her skills anymore. She knew that whatever unfolded would reveal even more about the people around her, including him. He wrestled with conflicting feelings. Pride, irritation, and something he didn't yet want to name. He was accustomed to being seen as the one with potential, the one destined for more. But here she was, quietly excelling in ways he hadn't imagined, changing perceptions without needing to chase applause. He tried to prepare himself to engage, to assert control, but he felt unsteady. For the first time, he realized that being wrong about someone else could also mean being wrong about himself. She, meanwhile, continued to navigate her own internal struggle. She wanted recognition, yes, but on her own terms. She wanted to be understood, not just acknowledged superficially. She also wanted to see if he could respect her without needing to redefine her according to his expectations. There was a quiet test at play, one that she didn't announce but that influenced every choice she made. Every encounter, every decision, became a negotiation between visibility and discretion, influence and humility. As the project approached, rumors began to swirl, adding fuel to the tension. People speculated about who would contribute most, who would lead, and whether the man who had dismissed her would finally recognize her abilities. These rumors weren't just idle chatter. They affected how people approached both of them, subtly shaping alliances and opinions before anyone had even taken the first step. The stakes were rising, and with them the pressure. He started to notice that the things he thought were advantages, connections, charm, confidence, were no longer enough to guarantee success. She had a different kind of advantage: consistency, intelligence, and credibility earned quietly over years. And every time he compared their approaches, his confidence wavered. It wasn't just about winning attention anymore, it was about understanding her, understanding the situation, and understanding himself in a way he had avoided for far too long. Her family, friends, and even casual acquaintances began to play roles in this unfolding drama. Some subtly encouraged collaboration, sensing the potential for impact if their strengths were combined. Others warned her to guard herself, to avoid letting him or anyone else dictate the narrative of her story. She listened, considered, but ultimately relied on her own instincts, the same instincts that had carried her this far without fanfare. Meanwhile, small confrontations began to emerge. Moments where his assumptions clashed with her reality. He would suggest an idea, and she would quietly offer a better one. He would assume she needed guidance, and she would demonstrate expertise he hadn't recognized. Each encounter was a reminder that the story he had believed about her, about local people, about success itself, was incomplete. And every encounter intensified the tension, as though the universe was testing him to see whether he could let go of pride and really see her. Even people outside their immediate circle began to notice. Colleagues, neighbors, and friends started discussing them in hushed tones, asking questions, making predictions. Some speculated about personal dynamics. Others focused on potential collaborations. The complexity of perception became a subplot in itself. How people see others, how assumptions shape decisions, and how one quiet person can disrupt an entire ecosystem of expectations. As the night of the project's launch approached, both of them were aware that everything was coming to a head. The project wasn't just a task or a milestone, it was a stage. And on that stage, every unspoken tension, every hidden skill, every underestimated strength would become visible. Everyone was waiting, consciously or unconsciously, to see who would rise, who would falter, and how the balance of perception might shift yet again. Neither of them spoke openly about the stakes, but they felt it. And beneath it all, the unresolved question lingered: how would he respond when her abilities weren't just recognized but celebrated? And how would she respond if he finally acknowledged her worth, not as someone local, not as someone underestimated, but as someone fully capable on her own terms? The streets, the people, the whispers, they all seemed to hold their breath. Something was about to happen, and neither of them, nor anyone around them, could predict exactly what. Every glance, every exchange, every small action had become loaded with meaning. And as the night drew closer, the tension was almost tangible, like electricity in the air before a storm. What would happen when the world finally saw her for everything she had been building quietly all these years? And would he be able to face the truth about himself before it was too late? No one knew yet, and that uncertainty hung heavier than anything else. The night had finally arrived. The project, which had been the topic of whispers, speculation, and quiet tension for weeks, was about to be unveiled. The venue was small but buzzing with anticipation. People leaned closer than usual, whispered among themselves, and exchanged glances as if they all sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. She arrived first, calm and collected, moving through the crowd like she belonged there entirely. He arrived moments later, trying to project confidence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer just about him. From the beginning the air was charged. Every glance, every step, every subtle interaction carried weight. He noticed how people's attention kept drifting toward her, even when she wasn't trying to be noticed. It wasn't arrogance or showmanship, she simply had a presence that drew others in naturally. And that presence carried a quiet authority, a sense of competence and depth that seemed to make even the room itself pause. He tried to focus on his own contributions, reminding himself that he had ideas, connections, and ambition, but it felt different this time. He felt exposed, like someone had peeled back a layer he didn't know he had. She worked through the initial part of the event effortlessly. People came to her with questions, seeking insight, and she answered them without hesitation. Every response revealed a depth of knowledge and experience that left listeners quietly impressed. It wasn't just that she was capable, it was that she had been building this capability quietly for years, unnoticed until now. And as the audience's attention shifted, he felt a creeping unease. The man who had once dismissed her as too local was suddenly unsure of how to position himself, unsure of what he even brought to the table in comparison. The tension between them grew more palpable when a key challenge was announced during the project. A problem that required quick thinking, collaboration, and decisive action. Everyone looked around, scanning faces for answers, and for the first time, their eyes met in a silent acknowledgement of what was about to unfold. He expected to lead, expected to dominate the discussion, but she stepped forward almost instinctively. Her suggestions were precise, confident, and grounded in insight he hadn't considered. Each word she spoke commanded attention, yet it wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about solving the problem. People began reacting. Murmurs of approval, nods of recognition, and quiet awe circulated through the crowd. He tried to interject, to assert his perspective, but her clarity made his words feel unnecessary, even redundant. The old hierarchy, where he imagined himself ahead, had dissolved in an instant. Every glance she received seemed to reinforce the reality he had been avoiding. He was no longer the center of attention, and for the first time he realized he didn't know what role he even had in the unfolding situation. Meanwhile, she moved through the room with quiet determination, engaging individuals, listening, and responding with insight. It was almost effortless for her, but each small action carried weight. People who had dismissed her before now recognized that she had been underestimated, and the realization spread like a quiet ripple. He watched it happen, unable to intervene, feeling a mix of admiration, envy, and fear. The power dynamic he had relied on for years was shifting, and the tension in his chest grew with every passing moment. A sudden complication arose. A part of the project didn't go according to plan, and everyone turned to look for guidance. His instinct was to step in, to take control, but before he could speak, she calmly assessed the situation and proposed a solution. The room leaned in as she outlined her plan, clearly and decisively. People nodded, agreed, and began acting on her guidance. The weight of authority, which he had assumed was his domain, had quietly passed to her. The crowd watched as she executed each step with confidence. Each decision she made, each correction she suggested, only heightened the tension between them. He felt his own abilities shrinking in comparison, the words he had rehearsed fading as her competence became undeniable. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The person he had once labeled too local was in fact the one carrying the room, commanding respect and handling pressure he had never imagined she could. And yet, even as the audience was captivated, she maintained her composure. There was no arrogance, no pretense, just focus, skill, and quiet determination. It was disarming. It forced everyone around her to recalibrate, including him. He realized that for the first time he had to see her fully, without preconceptions. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The tension escalated when the final stage of the project demanded collaboration under pressure. Both of them were now fully engaged, and the audience's attention was fixed on how they would navigate the challenge together. Every word exchanged, every suggestion offered felt like a high-stakes negotiation. He wanted to assert his own perspective, to reclaim some control, but he also couldn't ignore the effectiveness of her leadership. Their interaction became a delicate dance of respect, strategy, and unspoken acknowledgement of each other's abilities. Small setbacks increased the suspense. Miscommunications, unexpected obstacles, and high-pressure decisions forced both of them to respond quickly. The audience felt it, the intensity, the uncertainty, the sense that anything could happen. Every decision they made mattered not just for the project, but for the perception of who they were in each other's eyes and in the eyes of everyone watching. At one point, a moment of near failure brought the room to a hush. The outcome hung in the balance, and it was unclear who would take charge. He instinctively moved to act, but she anticipated the situation, stepping in with a solution that was both unexpected and effective. The tension exploded in that instant. Everyone leaned forward, the suspense unbearable, and he felt the weight of the moment pressing down like never before. The audience's focus was now fully on her, yet he couldn't look away. She had become the center of the storm, and his own role had shifted into an observer of her brilliance. The silence in the room, punctuated only by the faint hum of anticipation, made every action feel monumental. Every glance, every decision, every subtle exchange between them carried more meaning than words could capture. Even those around them were on edge. Friends, colleagues, and bystanders felt the suspense, unsure how it would all resolve. The subplots that had been quietly developing, questions of trust, respect, ambition, and recognition, were all coming to a head simultaneously. The stakes had never been higher, and the room seemed suspended in time, waiting for the final move. As the climax approached, he realized that everything, his pride, his assumptions, his understanding of her, and his own identity, was about to be tested. And she, calm but undeniably commanding, was ready to reveal just how much strength and insight she had been quietly cultivating all these years. The tension reached its peak as the final moment loomed. Every eye in the room was on them. Every breath felt like it could tip the balance. And in that suspended moment, with unspoken history, hidden talent, and raw human emotion all converging, the audience could feel that the resolution, whatever it would be, was just beyond reach. Nothing had been resolved yet, and yet everything had changed. The question hung in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. How would he respond now when she had shown the world, and him, just what she was truly capable of? And what choice would she make when the moment demanded more than quiet brilliance? The answer was coming. But not yet. Just when it seemed like the night had reached its peak, an unexpected shift hit the room. The air that had been heavy with anticipation suddenly tightened, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone had revealed a new piece of information. Something no one had anticipated, something that threatened to change everything. A rival group, one no one had mentioned, was quietly watching, evaluating, waiting for the moment to intervene. And suddenly the stakes weren't just about skill or perception anymore. They were about influence, reputation, and who would control the narrative of the entire event. He felt it immediately, that familiar tension knotting in his chest, sharper this time. His carefully built confidence began to falter as he realized the playing field had shifted in a way he hadn't planned for. All the assumptions he had about her, about the project, about the people around them, they were suddenly incomplete. He glanced at her, expecting to see hesitation, doubt, or uncertainty. But instead, she remained calm, eyes sharp, reading the room like she had anticipated this move all along. That only made him feel more off balance, as if the ground beneath him had tilted just enough to make him stumble without falling. The crowd sensed the change too. People whispered, moved closer to see reactions, and some looked toward him, expecting leadership, expecting him to regain control. But how could he, when the dynamics had shifted so drastically? He realized that the challenge wasn't just the project anymore, it was managing perception, responding to the unexpected, and keeping the tension from spiraling into chaos. Every second now carried weight, and every action, or inaction, would be noticed. She stepped forward again, this time in a way that left no room for doubt. Her voice was calm, but it carried authority, directing attention and action with precision. People began to follow her lead without hesitation, subtly reorganizing, adjusting, and responding. The twist had elevated the challenge, but she treated it as if she had trained for this her entire life. And for him, watching her take control so effortlessly, it was like the world had been inverted. Everything he thought he knew about strategy, about influence, about winning, was being rewritten before his eyes. The tension between them deepened even further when a subtle confrontation erupted. One of the observers, a person known for stirring trouble and testing loyalties, stepped forward with a pointed question aimed at him. It was public, challenging his authority, and implying that he had underestimated the situation. The room shifted, and every eye flicked toward him. It was a test, and he knew that any wrong move could undermine everything he had worked for. He opened his mouth, but before he could respond, she interjected, not aggressively, not to overshadow him, but with a clarity that drew everyone's attention away from his faltering words. The way she handled the moment forced him to step back and reconsider. His instinct to dominate, to assert control, felt almost wrong now. The twist wasn't just external, it was internal. He was being forced to confront not only her capabilities but his own assumptions, pride, and the way he had judged her for so long. Meanwhile, the second twist had another ripple effect. A hidden alliance, previously unnoticed, started to emerge from the crowd. People who had been quiet supporters now began subtly shifting the dynamics, leaning toward her leadership, reinforcing her strategies and quietly undermining his influence. The tension wasn't just between them anymore, it had expanded outward, involving everyone in the room, creating a high-stakes web of attention, expectation, and power. She seemed to anticipate every move. A brief glance at a colleague, a simple instruction, a calm correction. It was as if she could see the threads of influence and weave them together effortlessly. Every observer was now drawn into her orbit, and the man who had once dismissed her as too local felt more than ever like an outsider looking in on a system he didn't understand. He realized that winning here wasn't about being loud, clever, or ambitious. It was about being fully present, fully aware, and responding in real time to a web of human dynamics he had underestimated. Then came the most shocking part. A mistake, one that seemed minor at first, threatened to derail everything. A critical piece of the project's plan had been overlooked, a detail no one had noticed until this very moment. People froze. Eyes darted from him to her. Whispers erupted. The room held its breath. For a split second, it looked like chaos might take over, and the carefully balanced tension of the evening threatened to collapse. She reacted immediately, precise and decisive. She identified the mistake, assessed the impact, and proposed a solution that no one had considered. And in doing so, she didn't just save the project, she raised the stakes even higher. The crowd erupted into quiet admiration, and he felt something unfamiliar, awe but also fear. Fear that he had misjudged not only her, but the very nature of the challenge itself. The audience was now fully engaged, sensing that the story had shifted yet again. What had begun as a test of skill and competence had become a high-stakes display of strategy, perception, and influence. He realized that this second twist, the sudden emergence of new challenges, unseen rivals, and shifting alliances, was far more than a surprise. It was a turning point. And in the midst of it, he understood that he had only two options: adapt or be left behind entirely. She moved through the chaos with quiet grace, maintaining authority without arrogance, making decisions that kept the room focused, and subtly asserting a presence that drew everyone toward her vision. Every second, the suspense grew, and every glance between them carried more unspoken tension than any words could express. The stakes were no longer just professional, they were personal, emotional, and deeply human. By the time the final moments approached, it was clear to everyone watching that the climax wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about recognition, respect, and the collision of expectation versus reality. He could no longer ignore her. And she, calm and composed, seemed fully aware of the power she now held, not just over the room but over the assumptions, pride, and perceptions of everyone present. The audience leaned in. Hearts raced. Every eye was on them. And as the seconds ticked by, the suspense became almost unbearable. The second twist had done its work, raising the stakes, reshaping the conflict, and pushing them both to the edge. Nothing had been resolved yet, but everything had changed. The question now wasn't just who would succeed, it was how each of them would respond to the pressures, surprises, and unspoken challenges that had been thrown their way. And with every passing heartbeat, the story hurtled toward a climax that no one, not even the man who had underestimated her, could predict. The room went silent. Every eye was on her now, the tension so thick it felt like it could crack. The mistake that had threatened the project earlier loomed like a shadow over everyone, and for a moment even the man who had underestimated her wondered if this would all collapse. But she didn't flinch. Calmly, almost effortlessly, she laid out her plan step by step. Her voice was steady, clear, and commanding, leaving no room for doubt. The crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word, and even those who had doubted her now nodded in agreement. He watched, heart racing, as she navigated the problem with precision. The solution wasn't flashy, it wasn't about proving superiority, but it worked. Every person in the room immediately followed her lead, executing her ideas seamlessly. The project, which had teetered on the edge of failure, now began to move forward flawlessly. The same people who had whispered about her being too local were now whispering her name in admiration. He felt a mix of relief, awe, and something deeper, recognition of how wrong he had been. When the final piece fell into place, the room erupted, not with cheering or applause but with quiet, genuine respect. The tension dissolved slowly, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. She had not only saved the project but had transformed the way everyone saw her, including him. He realized in that instant that local was never about limitation. It was about foundation, roots, and resilience. And she had built more in quiet determination than he had ever managed in his loud ambition. For the first time their eyes met, not with challenge but with acknowledgement. No words were needed, everything they hadn't said over the years passed between them in a glance. He understood that respect had to be earned, not assumed. And she understood that recognition didn't need to be demanded, it could emerge naturally, quietly, powerfully. The main conflict, the tension between their worlds, between expectation and reality, had resolved itself in a way neither had forced. But just as the sense of closure began to settle, an unexpected ripple ran through the room. One of the observers, previously quiet and unassuming, stepped forward holding a folder filled with documents. The crowd quieted immediately. The folder contained evidence of another challenge, an opportunity, a hidden issue, and perhaps even a test no one had known existed. And inside that folder was a revelation that neither of them had anticipated. She had been operating with more than just skill and insight. Someone had been secretly supporting her, ensuring she had the tools and resources she needed to succeed. The twist sent a shockwave through the room. He looked at her, expecting confusion or hesitation, but she smiled, not smugly, not triumphantly, but with calm certainty. She had anticipated that someone might step in behind the scenes, and she had already accounted for it. What stunned him most was not the hidden support, but how she had navigated the challenge independently without leaning on it. It was a reminder that her strength didn't come from outside help. It came from her own talent, preparation, and insight. The audience held their collective breath, realizing that while the main conflict had been resolved, a deeper layer of intrigue had just been revealed. The man who had dismissed her as too local now fully understood that her journey had been complex, strategic, and far more impressive than he could have imagined. And yet, there was still room for questions, surprises, and challenges, because this final twist hinted that the story was far from over. Even as people started to process what had just happened, she remained calm at the center of it all. Every step she had taken that night, every choice she had made, had brought her to this moment, and yet she had prepared for contingencies no one else could see. He finally realized the depth of her foresight and discipline, and for the first time he felt something he had never experienced with her before: genuine humility. The project, now fully secured and praised, marked a victory not just for her, but for the lessons it carried. The danger of underestimating someone, the power of quiet competence, and the value of patience and preparation. The audience had witnessed a transformation, not of the project alone, but of perceptions, assumptions, and the dynamic between two people whose paths had collided in the most unexpected way. And yet, the folder in the quiet corner of the room promised more. A challenge that had been hidden from sight, a secret that could reshape everything they thought they had resolved. As she glanced at it briefly, her expression was unreadable, but the spark in her eyes hinted that she was already thinking several steps ahead. The climax had arrived, the main conflicts had been resolved, and yet the story left the audience on edge, wondering, what comes next when the unexpected still waits in the shadows? He stood beside her, no longer confident, no longer dismissive, but fully aware of her strength and the reality he had long ignored. And in that moment, the room understood that this was more than just a project. It was a lesson in perception, strategy, and human potential. And just as everyone began to exhale, the final twist settled like a whisper. The night had ended, but the real story, the one no one had anticipated, was only just beginning. The night slowly settled after the intensity of the project and the shock of the final twist. The crowd dispersed, conversations shifting from hushed tension to admiration and reflection. People talked about what they had seen, about how one person had quietly changed the dynamic of the entire room. And though the man had once dismissed her as too local, he now felt something deeper, a mix of respect, humility, and a realization that being underestimated is often someone else's blind spot, not a reflection of ability. As they stepped outside, the quiet streets felt different. The same shops, the same streetlights, the same familiar faces, but everything seemed sharper, more alive. He glanced at her, noticing details he had never truly seen before. The calm confidence in her posture, the way her eyes carried awareness and intelligence, and the subtle assurance that she didn't need validation from anyone. He wanted to speak, to bridge the gap that had existed between them for so long, but words felt inadequate. Instead, they walked side by side, the silence comfortable rather than tense. She broke the silence first, not with explanation or lecture, but with an observation about the evening. "People see what they're ready to see," she said softly, almost to herself. "Some take years to notice what's right in front of them." He absorbed her words, realizing she wasn't talking just about him, she was talking about all of them. About how assumptions can blind people to talent, insight, and strength. And in that quiet reflection, he understood that humility wasn't weakness. It was the bridge to seeing truth. The project, once a source of stress and uncertainty, had now become a shared victory. The problem that had threatened to derail it had been solved not with force, but with patience, insight, and collaboration. He began to see that success isn't always about who shouts the loudest or moves the fastest. It's often about who is steady, prepared, and willing to act when the moment demands it. She had embodied that lesson without a single boast, proving that recognition comes to those who persist quietly and thoughtfully. The subplots that had quietly developed throughout the story began to resolve themselves as well. The hidden allies in the room, once unrecognized, became acknowledged for their support, showing that success often relies on both visible and invisible networks of collaboration. The whispers about her being local faded entirely, replaced with genuine respect. And the rival group that had threatened the project's stability had left, their intentions neutralized by her decisive action and clarity of thought. Everything had a natural resolution, yet nothing felt rushed or forced. He finally spoke, breaking the quiet between them. "I was wrong," he admitted simply. "No excuses, no qualifiers. Just the truth, honest and unembellished." She smiled, not with triumph, but with acknowledgement. "It's not about being right or wrong," she said. "It's about noticing what's real." And in that moment, he realized that the lesson of the evening extended far beyond the project itself. It was about perception, judgment, and the human tendency to underestimate what we don't understand. Their personal dynamic had transformed as well. The tension that had once defined their interactions had shifted into mutual respect. He no longer saw her as local in any dismissive sense. He saw her as someone capable, intelligent, and resilient. And she, in turn, saw that he had begun to shed the arrogance and assumptions that had previously blinded him. Both had grown, not through confrontation, but through observation, experience, and quiet revelation. As the streets emptied and the night deepened, people continued to talk about what they had witnessed. The project's success had become a community story, a story about patience, preparedness, and the quiet power of competence. Those who had underestimated her realized that being overlooked isn't the same as being incapable. And those who had overestimated themselves began to see that true skill is often subtle, not flashy, and always rooted in experience and insight. She walked past familiar shops, past neighbors who had once barely noticed her, and felt the satisfaction of work done well and respect earned without theatrics. It was a victory that wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about truth coming to light, about perceptions being corrected, and about people finally seeing what had been there all along. The word local, once used to diminish her, now felt almost ironic. She had rooted herself in her abilities, her wisdom, and her calm persistence, and that root had grown strong enough to command attention, influence, and respect. He followed beside her, reflecting on how much he had learned in just one night. The arrogance he had carried for years had been replaced with awareness. The assumptions that had shaped his judgments were dismantled. And the realization that success isn't always measured by outward ambition but by consistent, thoughtful action was a revelation he wouldn't forget. He knew that from now on he would approach life, work, and people differently, more carefully, more observantly, and with less blind pride. Even the final twist of the hidden support network left a lasting impression. She had succeeded on her own merits, but the fact that someone had quietly backed her added nuance to the story. Life often includes unseen help, unexpected opportunities, and hidden forces, but true skill is measured by how you navigate the challenges, not by what you are handed. And she had navigated hers with poise, intelligence, and foresight. By the time they reached the end of the street, the tension had completely lifted. The audience, both in the room and beyond those present, had been left with a story that was intense, surprising, and ultimately inspiring. It wasn't just about one person proving herself. It was about the broader lesson that talent, preparation, and quiet confidence can transform perception and challenge assumptions. It was a story of growth, respect, and recognition earned the hard way.